Guests, dear distinguished members of the Hellenic Parliament, dear Chairman of the Council of the Armenian Community of Thessaloniki, ladies and gentlemen, let me first convey the warm regards of His Excellency, the Ambassador of the Republic of Armenia in Greece, Mr. Tikran Mekartichian, for this so much important press conference here in the heart of journalism, the Journalists Union of Macedonian Thrace.
Good evening. I'm so much grateful for your invitation to meet local Armenian free communities. And as it was mentioned in the video, I was awarded with 30,000 euros, but Azerbaijan actually refused to pay. Minister of Internal Affairs of Azerbaijan, I don't remember his name, actually told in the press conference they're not going to comply with the decision of European Court because the decisions of European Court are Islamophobic. So they didn't pay, and they refused to cooperate with the European Court, and they refused to cooperate with the United Nations Committee of Human Rights of the United Nations as well. So, just not to forget to mention this point. So, I'll start from the beginning. I'm not a human rights activist. I have nothing to do with politics. I'm not a politician. So I'm just a journalist and travel lover who visited 152 countries for today. And Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh was just one of the places I visited. So I spent 2 days in Nagorno-Karabakh, and actually it was in 2011. And after Nagorno-Karabakh, I visited Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan itself. So, a very interesting point that I paid attention in Azerbaijan is that during the Soviet times, it was a huge Christian minority, Armenians. It was actually the biggest minority in Azerbaijan. It's close to 1 million Armenians lived in Azerbaijan before the collapse of the Soviet Union. So when I visited Azerbaijan, it was before I was arrested. So I was as a tourist, I hired a car in Baku airport. So I traveled all around Azerbaijan. I just made almost 3,000 kilometers around Azerbaijan, from Baku to Lenkoran to Ganja to every place. So I was extremely surprised that I didn't find any evidence about the Armenian presence in this territory. So they destroyed absolutely everything. Churches, cemeteries, just everything. So close to 1 million Armenians lived in Azerbaijan before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Nowadays, there is no single Armenian, and everything is destroyed and disappeared. Even...
Το ταξίδι αυτό έγινε πριν τη σύλληψή μου. Πήγα και ως τουρίστας. Όπως κάθε τουρίστας, νίκιασα ένα αυτοκίνητο από το αεροδρόμιο του Μπακού.
So, the only Armenian church I found in Azerbaijan, it was in the city of Baku. And when I tried to take a photo of this church, so 2 policemen came to me and asked me, why do you need this kind of photos? So I said, it's a beautiful church, you want to take a photo. Actually, church was closed with the police around. So they told me, this is not Armenian church, this is Albanian church. I said, okay, so be it, Albanian church. So in some other places in Azerbaijan, I found half dilapidated and destroyed churches, but it was mentioned on the, it was written that is all that is Albanian churches. And the same, and I had a friends, Armenian friends, who lived in the city of Baku before the pogroms of 1988 and 89. So they kindly asked me if I can go to the neighborhood in Baku and to found the, first of all, Armenian cemetery, and to find the house.
Την οποία βρήκα ήταν στο Μπακού. Και μάλιστα πήγα να τη φωτογραφίσω και με πλησίασαν 2 αστυνομικοί, οι οποίοι άρχισαν να με ρωτάνε, ήταν κλειστοί και φρούγονταν από αστυνομικούς.
So the same is going to happen, in my own opinion, is occupied Nagorno-Karabakh. It was occupied 2 weeks ago. Finally, the last part of the Armenian lands on Nagorno-Karabakh. So I expect they will destroy all the Armenian heritage, and they will convert the Armenian churches to mosques, or at best case to so-called Albanian churches.
Κάτι αντίστοιχο φαντάζομαι ότι θα συμβεί και στα τελευταία εδάφη, τα οποία πλέον είναι κατεχόμενα από το Αζερμπαϊτζάν.
What I actually found, so instead of Armenian cemetery, I found just a parking with a lot of cars. And when I just tried to find the home, it was a Soviet high-rise. So when I tried to go around, so local people just asked me, what are you looking for? Are you Armenian spy or something? So actually it's a good question. And I think in the same situation nowadays, all the Armenian prisoners, including Ruben Vardanyan, who is not only Russian businessman and billionaire, he's the same tool. For example, let's imagine, hopefully not, but let's imagine, in case they will kill him in a jail, it will be good for Russians, for some elements in Armenia, and for his business partners in Russia, because he's the one who keeps a lot of financial secrets. So basically, I worried too much about him, and other prisoners as well. The last time I visited Nagorno-Karabakh, it was December 2021, 2 years ago exactly, before this war, before the current war, and before the blockade. So I was able to visit Nagorno-Karabakh. It was a little bit complicated because as a foreign citizen, I had to apply to the embassy of Nagorno-Karabakh in Yerevan and to receive the permit. And I was refused permit. And actually, when I talked with David Babayan, then he was a minister of foreign affairs of the Republic of Artsakh, so he told me that it's up to Russians to allow me to enter or not. So, but still, I decided to take a chance. So I hired a car in Yerevan airport and I decided to go to Artsakh without permit. So when I was stopped in the checkpoint called Zabukh checkpoint between Armenia and Artsakh, there were a lot of Russian peacekeeping officers from the peacekeeping forces. Actually, it's very hard to call them peacekeeping forces considering what they did in Ukraine, for example. But okay, let's leave emotions aside. So, Russian peacekeepers. So I spent like 2 hours by arguing with Russians that I need to go to Stepanakert, that I'm a journalist. I'm not going back to Yerevan, no way. So if you don't allow me to enter, I just will fly in the middle of the road. You just can't shoot me. So I'm not leaving this place. But basically, when I visited Nagorno-Karabakh 2 years ago, I felt that this is the end of Nagorno-Karabakh. I could feel it. First of all, so under control of the Armenian forces, there were like 3,000 square kilometers of the territory. It's maybe 20% of the total territory of the republic. The rest was occupied by Azerbaijan. So I could see Azerbaijanis all around. They were surrounded by Azerbaijanis. I could see Azerbaijani flags, Azerbaijani military posts. And furthermore, Azerbaijanis put like psychological pressure on the local Armenian population, even before this war, before the current war. So, for example, so you just couldn't call somewhere from Artsakh, from Nagorno-Karabakh, because of very bad connections. Because Azerbaijanis established center of communications of city of Shushi, where they captured it 3 years ago. So they damaged the quality of the signal. So just most of the time, you cannot connect to the internet, you cannot call to outside world. So it was 2 years ago. And so when I traveled all around the part of Artsakh under Armenian control, it was extremely sad what I could see. Many people actually already left their homes. Many people were killed during the war in 2020. And when I talked with local Armenians, so basically they asked me what's going to be happening. They asked me, so I asked them, what are you going to do? They asked me back. We don't know what to do because our homeland is here, our church is here, our cemeteries, everything is here. So we hope so much that Russians will like help us to survive. But they kind of Russophiles, I feel Russophiles. But I was born in Russia. I know what Russia is. So I tried to explain them, don't trust Russians. I'm not talking about Russian people, I'm talking about Russian government and Russian peacekeeping forces. But still the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, they trusted Russian forces, really they trusted. On the contrary, they told me, no, you like all the Jews, you don't trust people, but we trust people. It was really funny, like a joke. But nowadays, all of them refugees in Yerevan. I wasn't surprised. And unfortunately, I expected that Russians entered the Nagorno-Karabakh area, of course not to save Armenian lives, but to establish control in this region, on Southern Caucasus, and to take at least politically Azerbaijan under control, because the last Russian soldier left Azerbaijan back to 1993, I think. They left Azerbaijan. And nowadays, Russia came back to Azerbaijan. So nowadays, Russians have military bases in both Armenia and Azerbaijan. So I expected, so at least Russians will keep at least part of the Armenian population just to, you know, to show the world that we protect Armenians here. So they're not because of Armenians, but at least some excuse. But nowadays, all of Armenians left, except of maybe a couple of hundreds elderly people in the small villages. That's it. So now I think Russians need to find explanation why to stay in Nagorno-Karabakh if there is no Armenians. So I think they will establish kind of ghetto, a kind of zoo, Armenian zoo, a special village with happy Armenians, to bring people to this village and to show Armenian people who live in this village, and they say, thank you, Mr. Aliyev. I think so, for propaganda. That's actually what I expect. And the next, I think, the next conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan is going to be because of Azerbaijani enclaves in the territory of Armenia. There are about, I think, 4 or 5 enclaves. How many? 4 or 5, I think. Within the territory of Armenia, just small islands of the Azerbaijani territory from these ex-Soviet maps. Really small, maybe 1 kilometer or 1 kilometer, really small. But on the main roads of Armenia, for example, the main road that connects Yerevan with the Iranian border, they have 2 enclaves on the way. So in case that Azerbaijanis will occupy this area, so Armenia will lose any connection with the southern part of the country. And the same, the main roads that goes from Yerevan to Tbilisi in Georgia, there are 2 enclaves on the way, just in the middle of the way. So, so the situation is really complicated. The question arises, why Russians betrayed Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh? Logical question. So in my own opinion, this is because of the war in Ukraine. So Russia now is dependent too much on Azerbaijani pipeline Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan. And the part of the pipeline which goes from Azerbaijan to Georgia and Turkey and goes to Bulgaria and Greece. So it's somehow connected. So Russians, what they do, they need to re-export Russian petrol and gas to go around the European sanctions. So they sell gas and petrol to Azerbaijan to resell it to European Union. So that's what's happening now. So that's why Russians dependent on Azerbaijani government nowadays. And that's why on 22nd of February, 2 years ago, 1 day before the war in Ukraine started, 1 day before the war, Ilham Aliyev, president of Azerbaijan, traveled to Moscow to meet with Putin. Probably, you know. And it was an agreement on 40 points, but actually just 1 point is important. So Putin, in my own opinion, actually expected that tomorrow is going to be the war, of course, and it's going to be sanctions from European Union and the United States. So he's going to find some ways to go around. And so the biggest supporter of Russia nowadays is Azerbaijan. So it's incredible because Ilham Aliyev actually condemned Russia for aggression against Ukraine, but with the other hand, to help Putin to go around the sanctions. So that's why. So Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, is the personal gift from Putin to Ilham Aliyev, basically.
Μετά από τα τελευταία γεγονότα που βιώνουμε σήμερα στη λωρίδα της Γάζας και τη στάση της Τουρκίας που είναι ξεκάθαρα υπέρ της Χαμάς, μήπως θεωρείτε ότι θα ήρθε η εποχή όπου το Ισραήλ θα αναθεωρήσει τη στάση και θα περάσει μια αναγνώριση της γενοκτονίας?
and move on to recognize the genocide?
This is a really complicated question because, first of all, Israel is in war now and my mother in a shelter, but the truth is the most important, I think. First of all, of course, I condemned Israel for supplying weapons to Azerbaijan. Me personally, I think that most of normal, educated Israelis, they do not support Azerbaijan. But unfortunately, both Armenia and Azerbaijan are hostages of the current situation in the Middle East, unfortunately. And now you see what's happening in Israel. So Iran-backed Hamas is bombing in Israel. So of course, the main goal of supporting of Azerbaijan, and both political and weapon supplies, is to establish base in Azerbaijani territory against Iran. So this is not because of Armenians, because any hatred to Armenians. There's no hatred between Jews and Armenians, and never happened actually. But unfortunately, so Israel basically today is ready to support any oppressive regime, anyone, not only Azerbaijani. So Israeli government supports a lot of regimes, for example, Myanmar. For actually, there is a civil war in Myanmar and 10,000 people were killed by Israeli weapons. Israel supplies weapons to Republic of Colombia for the guerrilla war against Venezuela. And many places. For example, I visited Mexico months ago. I've been to Mexico and I talked with local politicians and they raised the issue of Israeli weapons that Israel supplies to Guatemala, to some guerrilla fighters or something. So Israel supplies weapons to India with the war in Pakistan, So for Israeli military industry, this is just a business. And for Israeli politicians, this is just a base for the future war against Iran. Hopefully not, but who knows. So I started in Israeli. Officially, Israel did not recognize Armenian genocide. But in Israeli school, I studied in Israeli school, and we just started Armenian genocide. Not only Armenian genocide, the Greek genocide. Because basically not only Armenians suffered from the Turks. Greeks and Armenians and Assyrians and Georgians and many nations, and Yazidis. And all of that I studied in Israeli school. I think it was 7th or 8th grade of Israeli school. So I don't think that many countries in the world they study Armenian genocide in the school. But on the other hand, Israel didn't recognize the genocide of Armenians. Actually, as I mentioned, both Armenia and Israel are hostages in the current situation.